I am Juliana, 32 years old, and after 5 dedicated years as a marketing specialist at Vertex Solutions, I thought I knew where I stood. My colleagues respected my attention to detail and reliability. But that Tuesday morning, my boss Derek Coleman looked right at me during our team meeting and announced, "Your role has been eliminated effective immediately." I nodded calmly, packed my desk, while coworkers awkwardly avoided eye contact, and walked out without a word. Before I reveal how I went from fired to irreplaceable, in under 24 hours, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and subscribe for more workplace justice stories that will leave you speechless. When I joined Vertex Solutions 5 years ago, I brought with me a master's degree in digital marketing and a determination to excel in the tech industry. The company specialized in business software solutions with products ranging from inventory management to customer relationship systems for mid-sized businesses. My role as a marketing specialist initially focused on digital campaigns, but I quickly expanded my responsibilities to encompass the entire online presence of the company. During my tenure, I consistently received excellent performance reviews. My campaign for our flagship product, Vortex Connect, increased sales by 35% in a single quarter, setting a company record that still stands. I prided myself on meticulous documentation, detailed analytics reports, and strategic planning that kept us ahead of competitors. While not the most outspoken person in meetings, I earned respect through consistent results and reliability. My desk was always organized with color-coded files for different projects and campaigns. Colleagues often joked about my marketing command center with its perfectly arranged monitors displaying real-time analytics and campaign performance. I kept comprehensive records of everything: campaign, assets, performance metrics, client feedback, and strategy documents. This habit, which some considered excessive, would ultimately prove crucial. I invested in my professional development continuously, recently completing an advanced analytics certification at my own expense. The certification took 6 months of evening and weekend study, but I believed it would benefit both my career and the company. When I shared this accomplishment in our departmental meeting, my immediate supervisor Derek seemed impressed, but Thomas Grayson, our new marketing director, barely acknowledged it. The culture at Vertex had been changing over the past 6 months, coinciding with the arrival of our new Chief Operating Officer, Marcus Wilson. He came from a larger tech company with a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and efficiency measures. His presentations were filled with buzzwords like streamlining operations, optimizing human resources, and eliminating redundancies. Each time he used these phrases, employees exchanged nervous glances, understanding the underlying message. When I first joined Vertex, the company culture emphasized innovation, collaboration, and work-life balance. Our previous CEO, Andrew Morrison, knew everyone by name and regularly held informal lunch sessions where employees could share ideas directly. The office featured comfortable collaboration, spaces, a well-stocked break room, and flexible working hours that accommodated different lifestyles and family needs. Under Marcus Wilson's influence, the atmosphere gradually shifted. The break room snacks disappeared, justified as a cost-saving measure. Flexible working arrangements became subject to managerial approval rather than being standard practice. Collaborative projects were replaced by top-down directives with rigid deadlines. Weekly reports on individual productivity became mandatory, creating an environment of constant evaluation and comparison. The most significant change for the marketing department came when Derek announced that Thomas Grayson would be joining as our new marketing director. Thomas came from Marcus's previous company and immediately established himself as Marcus's right-hand man. Tall, always dressed in expensive suits, and speaking with unwavering confidence, Thomas made it clear he had plans to revitalize our marketing approach. Within his first month, Thomas began subtly sidelining existing team members. Projects that would typically have been assigned to experienced staff were suddenly handled by new hires, specifically people Thomas had worked with previously. In meetings, he would interrupt veteran team members, but give newcomers ample time to speak. Ideas from long-standing employees were noted, but rarely implemented, while suggestions from his former colleagues were praised as innovative and fast-tracked. I maintained my professionalism despite these changes. When Thomas questioned my social media strategy during a presentation, I provided data demonstrating its effectiveness, rather than becoming defensive. When he reassigned my responsibility for the company blog to a new hire, I created detailed documentation to ensure a smooth transition. I continued to exceed my targets and maintain positive relationships with clients, believing that results would ultimately speak for themselves. The most telling sign of trouble came 2 weeks before my termination, when Thomas brought in Melissa Parker as a marketing coordinator. Her role seemed deliberately ambiguous, with responsibilities that overlapped significantly with mine and other team members. Melissa was in her mid-20s, clearly nervous in the new environment, but Thomas introduced her as having exceptional talent and immediately assigned her to work on our major client account with Henderson Technologies, a project I had been leading for months. During her onboarding, I noticed Melissa taking particular interest in my files and campaigns. She asked numerous questions about my processes and requested access to my project folders to better understand the workflow. Being a team player, I shared information freely, though I began to feel uneasy about the specific nature of her questions and Thomas's obvious favoritism toward her. Looking back, all the warning signs were there. The sideways glances from Thomas when I entered the room, the gradual exclusion from strategic meetings, the whispered conversations between Thomas and Marcus that stopped when I approached. But I was focused on my work, believing that my track record of success would protect me from the organizational changes happening around us. That misplaced confidence would be shattered in a single morning meeting that changed everything. The Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at 8:15, settled at my desk with coffee, and reviewed the analytics from our latest email campaign. The numbers were strong, a 42% open rate, well above industry average, and a conversion rate that had our client ecstatic. I was preparing notes for our regular 9:30 team meeting when a company-wide email arrived at 8:25. Mandatory Marketing Department meeting, 8:30 a.m., Conference Room A. The email came from Thomas, marked high priority. The sudden scheduling and formal tone were unusual, creating an immediate sense of unease. As I gathered my notebook and tablet, I noticed other team members looking equally confused. Lisa Chen, our content writer, and my closest ally in the department caught my eye across the office. "Any idea what this is about?" she whispered, as we walked toward the conference room. I shook my head. No advance agenda. Never a good sign. Conference room. A was our largest meeting space, typically reserved for client presentations or company-wide announcements. As we entered, I immediately noticed Marcus Wilson sitting at the head of the table beside Thomas. Marcus rarely attended departmental meetings, focusing instead on high-level strategy and board communications. His presence confirmed this was no ordinary gathering. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as our team of 12 marketing professionals filled the chairs around the table. Derek Coleman, my immediate supervisor for the past 3 years, sat rigidly beside Marcus, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by an uncomfortable stiffness. Thomas stood at the front of the room, reviewing something on his tablet, occasionally glancing up with an expression that seemed almost smug. At exactly 8:30, Thomas cleared his throat and began without preamble. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules. As you know, Vertex Solutions is committed to remaining competitive in an evolving marketplace. To that end, we have been conducting a thorough analysis of our organizational structure and resource allocation." The corporate jargon immediately set off warning bells. I had heard similar phrasing in previous companies right before layoffs were announced. Around the table, I could see colleagues shifting uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others glancing nervously at Marcus. Thomas continued, "After careful consideration and extensive discussion with leadership, we are implementing strategic realignment of our marketing resources effective immediately." He proceeded to outline a restructuring plan, describing a streamlined approach with centralized decision-making and elimination of redundancies. The presentation included slides with organizational charts, budget projections, and efficiency metrics, but the human impact of these changes remained conspicuously unaddressed. Midway through his presentation, Thomas paused his gaze, settling directly on me. "Juliana," he said, his voice suddenly colder, "your position has been eliminated effective immediately." The room fell silent. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn toward me, expressions ranging from shock to pity to uncomfortable embarrassment. My mind raced to process the statement so casually delivered in the middle of a presentation, as if announcing a minor schedule change rather than upending someone's career and livelihood. Marcus leaned forward, adding his authority to the pronouncement. "This decision reflects our strategic realignment of resources and is not a reflection on your individual performance. The company is moving in a direction that requires different skill sets and organizational structures." The prepared statement felt rehearsed and impersonal. Derek, who had worked closely with me for years, stared intently at his notepad, refusing to make eye contact. Melissa, sitting near Thomas, looked down at her hands, a flush spreading across her cheeks. I took a deep breath, maintaining my composure through sheer force of will. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady, despite the internal turmoil. "Would you like me to leave the meeting now?" "Yes, that would be appropriate," Thomas replied. "Sandra from Human Resources is waiting at your desk to assist with your exit process." As I gathered my notebook and stood, Lisa made a small movement as if to speak or object, but stopped when Thomas shot her a warning glance. The message was clear: question this decision at your own risk. Walking out of that conference room past colleagues I had worked alongside for years was one of the most challenging moments of my professional life. Some murmured quiet good lucks, or "we will miss yous," but most averted their eyes, perhaps fearing association with the person who had just been designated as expendable. True to Thomas's word, Sandra from HR was waiting at my desk, clipboard in hand, and a company-issued cardboard box beside her. In her late 40s with prematurely gray hair, Sandra had always been friendly during our limited interactions. Today, however, her expression was strictly professional, her usual warmth replaced by procedural efficiency. "I need to conduct a brief exit interview and review the termination paperwork with you," she explained, her voice lowered to avoid attracting attention from nearby desks. "Then I will need to collect your company ID, parking pass, and laptop. You can use this box for your personal items." The exit interview was perfunctory, focusing primarily on confidentiality agreements and non-disclosure policies. Sandra emphasized repeatedly that I was prohibited from discussing proprietary company information or contacting clients. When I asked about the specific reasons for my termination, she repeated the same corporate language Marcus had used: strategic realignment and organizational restructuring. As I packed my personal items, family photos, a small plant Lisa had given me for my birthday desk organizers I had purchased, and a few books, colleagues cast sympathetic glances but maintained their distance. The message from management had been clear, and no one wanted to be the next person called into an unexpected meeting. As I was nearly finished packing, Lisa approached under the pretense of retrieving a document from the nearby printer. As she passed my desk, she slipped a folded note into my hand. "This is not right," she whispered. "Call me later." I nodded, slightly appreciating the small gesture of solidarity in an otherwise dehumanizing process. Within 45 minutes of the announcement, I had signed all necessary paperwork, handed over my company property, and was being escorted to the exit by Sandra, box of personal belongings in my arms. At the building entrance, Sandra's professional demeanor softened momentarily. For what it is worth, this came as a surprise to HR as well. The decision was made at the executive level. She hesitated, then added, "Good luck, Juliana," before turning back toward the elevators. I walked to my car with measured steps, maintaining my dignity until I was safely inside with the doors locked. Only then did I allow the emotions to surface: shock, giving way to anger, confusion, and fear about my financial future. I sat motionless in the parking lot, replaying the events of the morning, searching for warning signs I might have missed, or actions I could have taken to prevent this outcome. After several minutes of processing, I started my car and drove home, determined to use the remainder of the day constructively rather than surrendering to despair. I had built my career on planning, organization, and strategic thinking. Those same skills would now be directed toward navigating this unexpected crisis and determining my next steps. Arriving home, I changed out of my work clothes into comfortable sweatpants and a t-shirt, a small act of reclaiming control over my day. I made a cup of strong coffee and sat at my dining table with a notebook, methodically creating an action plan. First, I needed to review my finances, calculating how long my savings would last, identifying expenses I could reduce, and determining when I would need to begin drawing unemployment benefits. Next, I would update my resume and LinkedIn profile, reconnect with my professional network, and begin researching job opportunities. As I worked, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was an automated message from Vertex's HR system, detailing my final paycheck severance package, 2 weeks of pay, insultingly minimal for 5 years of service, and information about Cobra health insurance continuation. The email also included a reminder that my access to company systems would be deactivated by end of business day, and requested the return of my company laptop within 48 hours. The laptop. I glanced at my work computer, sitting on the coffee table where I had placed it upon arriving home. While I had been instructed to return it, my access hadn't yet been revoked. This meant I had a brief window to retrieve personal items, bookmarks, browser extensions I had created, and non-proprietary templates I had developed that weren't explicitly company property. I opened the laptop and logged in, intending only to clean up my personal digital space before returning the equipment. I navigated to my documents folder, quickly separating personal files from company materials. As I sorted through project folders, I opened one labeled Henderson Campaign 2023 to ensure I wasn't taking any proprietary information. The Henderson Technologies account was our department's most significant client relationship, representing nearly 20% of the company's annual revenue. I had led the digital marketing strategy for Henderson for the past year, developing a comprehensive campaign that had increased their user engagement by 45%. The folder contained strategy documents, creative briefs, analytics reports, and presentation materials I had developed. As I reviewed the files to ensure I wasn't inadvertently taking company property, I noticed something odd. The last modified date on several documents was recent, within the past week, despite my not having updated them recently. Curious, I opened one of the modified files, a presentation titled Henderson Strategic Roadmap 2023 to 2024. What I found stunned me. The presentation had been edited to remove my name as the author and contributor, replaced with Melissa Parker, marketing coordinator. The content, my analysis, strategy, recommendations, and creative direction remained identical, but the attribution had been completely altered. The file properties showed it had been modified yesterday afternoon. With growing suspicion, I opened another document, a comprehensive social media strategy I had developed for Henderson's product launch. Again, my name had been replaced with Melissa's, though every word of the content remained my work. This pattern repeated across multiple files, reports, creative briefs, client communications, all modified recently to change attribution, while preserving my work product. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. Tomorrow morning, less than 24 hours after my termination, Melissa was scheduled to present the Henderson campaign strategy to their executive team. I had helped prepare for this presentation last week, creating detailed slides and talking points for what I thought would be my presentation. Now, it appeared Melissa would be delivering my work as her own, with no one at Vertex aware of the deception except Thomas, who had clearly orchestrated it. I dug deeper, checking email archives in my offline folders. 3 weeks ago, Thomas had emailed me requesting comprehensive documentation of the Henderson campaign for departmental records. I had complied, providing detailed materials and access to my project folders. 2 weeks ago, he had added Melissa to the Henderson account to provide support and learn from your expertise. 1 week ago, he had removed me from a planning meeting for the Henderson presentation, explaining it as a scheduling conflict. The pattern was unmistakable. Thomas had systematically positioned Melissa to take over my work product, gradually removing me from the project while ensuring all my materials were accessible. My termination had been timed precisely to occur after all my work was complete, but before the major presentation, where attribution would matter. I reviewed my employment contract still saved in my personal email. The intellectual property clause specified that work product created for the company belonged to Vertex, but it also included language about proper attribution and credit for creative work. By removing my name and replacing it with Melissa's, Thomas wasn't just reassigning work, he was falsifying authorship and misrepresenting creative origin. More concerning was the potential impact on the Henderson relationship. Their contract with Vertex included specific language about consistency in account management and transparency in project staffing. The abrupt removal of the lead strategist immediately before a major presentation, combined with misattribution of work, could potentially violate those terms. Henderson's CEO, Victoria Henderson, was known for her emphasis on ethical business practices and authentic business relationships. I began taking screenshots and documenting everything I found. File properties, showing modification dates, side-by-side comparisons of original and altered documents, email threads showing the gradual maneuvering that led to this moment. I was careful to focus only on attribution issues rather than the content itself, recognizing the line between protecting my professional reputation and violating confidentiality agreements. As I compiled the evidence, I considered my options. I could contact an employment attorney, but legal action would be lengthy, expensive, and potentially damaging to my professional reputation. I could reach out to Henderson directly, but that might violate non-solicitation clauses in my contract. I could simply walk away accepting what had happened and focusing on finding new opportunities. Or I could address the situation directly armed with clear evidence and professional leverage. I recalled a conversation with Lisa from legal during a company holiday party last year. She had mentioned that intellectual property misrepresentation could create significant liability for a company, particularly when it involved client relationships. Attribution might seem like a small thing, she had said, but in our industry, it's the equivalent of falsifying financial records. The damage to client trust can be irreparable. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, the colleague, who had slipped me the note earlier. "Chaos here after you left. Thomas announced Melissa is taking lead on Henderson presentation tomorrow. Many of us uncomfortable with how this is being handled. You okay?" Her message confirmed my suspicions and helped solidify my decision. This wasn't just about my job anymore. It was about professional ethics, client relationships, and the integrity of the work I had created. I began drafting an email, carefully weighing each word to remain professional, while clearly communicating the seriousness of the situation I had uncovered. I spent the next hour crafting my response, drafting and revising to ensure my communication was precise, professional, and powerful. This wasn't a moment for emotional reactions or vague accusations. I needed to present facts, clearly demonstrate the potential consequences objectively, and position myself as a professional addressing a serious business issue rather than a terminated employee seeking revenge. First, I organized my evidence chronologically, creating a clear timeline from the initial development of the Henderson campaign materials through the recent modifications that changed attribution. I compiled screenshots showing file properties, revision histories, and side-by-side comparisons of original and altered documents. I created a concise summary document highlighting the key points. 1. Original creation dates of materials with my authorship. 2. Dates and nature of modifications changing attribution to Melissa. 3. Specific sections of my employment contract regarding proper attribution. 4. relevant sections of the Henderson client agreement regarding account management. Next, I prepared a professional email that would command attention without appearing threatening. The subject line needed to convey urgency while focusing on business impact rather than personal grievance. After several attempts, I settled on urgent presentation for Henderson account, critical information. I addressed the email to Thomas as my former direct supervisor, but strategically copied Marcus COO, Janet Miller HR Director, and Richard Palmer CEO. Including this distribution list served multiple purposes. It ensured the information couldn't be easily buried, established that I was following proper channels by including HR, and demonstrated confidence in my position by addressing the most senior leadership. The email began with a neutral professional tone. I am writing regarding an urgent matter concerning tomorrow's Henderson Technologies presentation that requires immediate attention. After clearing personal files from my company laptop prior to its return, I discovered concerning modifications to the Henderson campaign materials I developed during my tenure at Vertex Solutions. I continued by outlining the facts, objectively avoiding accusatory language. The comprehensive strategy documents, analytics reports, and presentation materials created under my direction have been modified within the past week to remove my name as author and contributor, replacing it with Melissa Parker, Marketing Coordinator. While the content remains identical to my original work, the attribution has been completely altered. This modification appears to have occurred on specific date, approximately X days before my position was eliminated. I attached selected screenshots and the summary document as evidence, then addressed the potential business implications. This situation creates several concerns that may impact Vertex's relationship with Henderson Technologies. 1. The Henderson contract specifically requires transparency regarding account team changes and attribution of creative work. 2. Victoria Henderson has explicitly emphasized ethical business practices in previous meetings, including proper credit for creative contributions. 3. Tomorrow's presentation would involve presenting my strategic approach and creative direction as the work of someone who joined the company 2 weeks ago, which may damage credibility if discovered. 4. The presentation includes performance projections and strategic recommendations based on my analysis and expertise, which Melissa may not be equipped to properly explain or defend if questioned in detail. Rather than explicitly threatening legal action or client notification, I allowed the implications to be clear while maintaining professional language. While I understand that my employment with Vertex has ended, I have a professional interest in ensuring my work is properly attributed and that the Henderson relationship is not inadvertently damaged by misrepresentation of authorship. Intellectual property attribution is a matter I take seriously, as I believe does Vertex Solutions based on our employment agreements and stated company values. I concluded with a professional closing that implied action without specifying threats. Given that the Henderson presentation is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, this matter requires immediate attention. I am available to discuss resolution options at your convenience and can be reached at phone number. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Juliana Reynolds. After reviewing the email multiple times for tone clarity and professionalism, I took a deep breath and clicked send. The timestamp showed 3:42 p.m. Almost immediately, I received automatic out-of-office replies from both Thomas and Marcus, indicating they were in off-site meetings for the afternoon. However, the email tracking showed that both Janet from HR and CEO Richard Palmer had opened the email within minutes of receiving it. The wait began. For the next 2 hours, I experienced waves of anxiety and second-guessing. Had I overstepped by copying the CEO? Should I have consulted an attorney first? Would this be perceived as the actions of a disgruntled employee rather than a legitimate business concern? I distracted myself by continuing to update my resume and reaching out to industry contacts, but checked my phone compulsively for responses. At 5:15 p.m., I received a text from Lisa. "Something big happening here." Thomas called back to office for emergency meeting. Melissa in tears in bathroom. Marcus on conference call in Richard's office, Janet from HR running between meetings. No one telling us anything but clearly connected to you. Her message confirmed my email had made an impact, though the nature of that impact remained unclear. I replied thanking her for the update and asking her to let me know if she heard anything more definitive. At 5:45 p.m., my phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, not wanting to appear too eager or nervous by answering immediately. The caller left no message. At 5:55 p.m., an email arrived from Richard Palmer's executive assistant, Mr. Palmer, requests your availability for an immediate call regarding your email from this afternoon. Please confirm you can join a conference call at 6:00 p.m. I quickly replied, confirming my availability, and received dial-in information for the conference call. As I gathered my notes and evidence documents preparing for whatever might come next, my phone rang again at precisely 5:59 p.m. The caller ID displayed Vertex Solutions, HR. I took a deep breath and answered the call with a professional, "Hello, this is Juliana." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Janet Miller's voice came through, loud and strained. The HR director's usually measured tone had been replaced by barely contained anger. "Are you threatening this company? Because that's how your email reads to me." I remained calm, having anticipated an emotional reaction. "Hello, Janet. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm bringing a serious issue to the company's attention that could affect the Henderson-client relationship. This looks like blackmail. Juliana," she continued, her voice still elevated, "you're terminated this morning, and by afternoon you're sending emails to the entire executive team with veiled threats about client relationships. Do you understand the legal exposure you've created for yourself?" "I understand you might see it that way initially," I replied evenly, "but I'd encourage you to review the evidence I provided. This isn't about my termination. It's about misattribution of creative work that's about to be presented to our largest client." "Our client, not yours anymore," Janet corrected sharply. "Yes, of course," I acknowledged, "but the work being presented is still mine with someone else's name on it. The documentation clearly shows the files were modified to change attribution while keeping the content identical." There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling. Janet's tone shifted slightly, still stern but less accusatory. "I have your evidence here. I need to ask you directly. How did you access these files after your termination?" "I didn't access anything after termination. As instructed in the HR email, I was clearing personal files from my company laptop before returning it. My system access was still active, and I discovered the modified files while separating personal from company materials." Another pause. "And you haven't contacted Henderson directly about this?" "No," I confirmed. "That would violate my non-solicitation agreement. I brought this directly to Vertex leadership as the appropriate channel." Janet sighed, and I could hear the tension in her voice, modulating from anger to concern. "This is an incredibly complicated situation you've created, Juliana." "I didn't create this situation," I corrected gently. "I discovered it and reported it through proper channels. The Henderson presentation is tomorrow morning, which created urgency." "Richard wants to speak with you," Janet said abruptly. "He's setting up a conference call. Can you be available in the next few minutes?" "Yes, I just received the invitation from his assistant. I'll join at 6. "This isn't over," Janet warned before ending the call. At exactly 6 o'clock, I dialed into the conference call. After entering the access code, I heard several voices already in conversation, which abruptly stopped when the system announced my arrival. "Juliana, this is Richard Palmer," came the CEO's distinctive voice. At 62, Richard had founded Vertex 20 years ago and maintained an old-school approach to business that emphasized relationships and reputation. "Thank you for joining us on short notice." "Thank you for arranging this call, Mr. Palmer," I responded professionally. "I have several people on this call," Richard continued. "Janet Miller from HR, our legal counsel, Robert Thompson, Marcus Wilson, Thomas Grayson, and Melissa Parker. We're addressing the email you sent regarding the Henderson presentation materials. The number of participants surprised me, particularly the inclusion of Melissa. Her presence suggested they were taking the matter seriously rather than dismissing it outright. I've reviewed your email and attachments, Richard continued. Can you briefly summarize your concerns for everyone on the call? I presented the situation concisely, sticking to verifiable facts without accusation. I described discovering the modified files, the pattern of attribution changes, and the potential impact on the Henderson relationship given tomorrow's presentation. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before Thomas spoke, his voice carrying a defensive edge. This is clearly a case of a disgruntled employee trying to cause problems after being let go for performance reasons. Juliana's position was eliminated as part of our departmental restructuring. The materials in question belong to Vertex, and we have every right to assign presentation responsibilities as we see fit. That's not accurate, Thomas, I responded calmly. My termination was described as a position elimination, not performance-based. And while the content belongs to Vertex, changing attribution of creative work is a separate issue from reassigning responsibilities. Marcus interjected. This seems like a misunderstanding that's been blown out of proportion. In any transition, there are bound to be documentation issues. The screenshots show systematic removal of Juliana's name and replacement with Melissa's. Richard interrupted his tone, indicating he wasn't accepting the dismissive explanation. That's not a documentation issue, that's deliberate modification. Thomas explained this. Thomas's response came after a noticeable pause. We were simply updating materials to reflect current staffing. Since Melissa would be delivering the presentation, we updated the materials accordingly. Updating would mean adding Melissa as a presenter, Richard countered. These screenshots show removal of Juliana as the author and strategist, not just updating presentation details. Suddenly, a female voice broke in, trembling slightly. I need to say something. It was Melissa speaking for the first time. Thomas instructed me to modify the files. He said since I would be taking over the account, the materials should show me as the originator, so the client wouldn't be confused. Her admission created immediate tension on the call. Thomas began to object, but Richard cut him off. Melissa, are you saying Thomas specifically directed you to remove Juliana's name from these materials and replace it with yours? Yes, she confirmed, her voice steadier now. He said it would be confusing for the client to see one name on the strategy documents and a different person presenting them. He told me Juliana was being transitioned out and I shouldn't mention her involvement to anyone. That was 3 weeks ago, I noted, before my position was supposedly eliminated for structural reasons. Marcus attempted to regain control of the narrative. This is clearly a miscommunication. Thomas was preparing for a transition that had already been determined at the leadership level. That's not how we operate, Richard interrupted sharply. If transition plans were in place, they should have been transparent to all parties, including HR and the affected employee. Janet, were you aware of plans to terminate Juliana 3 weeks ago? Janet's response was measured but clear. No. The paperwork for Juliana's termination was submitted to HR yesterday afternoon as an immediate position elimination due to departmental restructuring. There was no mention of performance issues or prior transition planning. The call descended into uncomfortable silence before Richard spoke again, his tone significantly colder. I think we need to address something more fundamental here. The Henderson account represents 20% of our annual revenue. Victoria Henderson has been my personal friend for 15 years and places particular emphasis on ethical business practices. Their contract with us includes specific language about transparency and attribution. Richard, if I may, Robert, the legal counsel, interjected. The Henderson contract contains an ethics clause that specifically covers intellectual property attribution. If we present someone else's work product as having been created by another individual, that would constitute a direct violation of Section 7.3 of our agreement. And if Victoria discovered this misrepresentation, Richard asked, based on previous incidents, it would likely result in contract termination. Robert replied. Henderson Technologies severed ties with Axiom Partners last year over a similar issue of misattributed creative work. The case received significant industry attention. This revelation shifted the energy of the call dramatically. What had begun as an HR issue was now clearly understood as a significant business risk involving the company's largest client. The presentation is scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Richard noted, his voice tense. We cannot reschedule without raising questions, and we cannot proceed with materials that misrepresent authorship. Thomas, how exactly were you planning to handle detailed questions about strategy development and analytics methodology when Melissa has been here for 2 weeks and didn't create the materials? Thomas had no satisfactory answer, offering only vague assurances about having prepared Melissa thoroughly. That's not adequate, Richard stated flatly. Victoria Henderson asks penetrating questions about methodology. She expects the presenter to have intimate knowledge of the strategic thinking behind the recommendations. As the gravity of the situation became clear to everyone on the call, the discussion shifted from questioning my motives to frantically developing a solution for the impending crisis. The Henderson presentation couldn't be canceled without raising serious concerns, couldn't proceed with misattributed materials, and couldn't be effectively delivered by someone who hadn't created the strategic approach being presented. The company that had terminated me hours earlier now faced a problem only I could solve. The tone of the call transformed as Richard Palmer took control of the discussion. Gone was any pretense that this was a minor issue or misunderstanding. The CEO's voice carried the sharp edge of someone addressing a crisis that threatened a significant business relationship. Let me be absolutely clear about where we stand, Richard stated, addressing everyone on the call. Tomorrow morning we are presenting to a client that represents 20% of our annual revenue. The materials we plan to present have been deliberately manipulated to misattribute authorship. The person scheduled to present has insufficient knowledge to effectively communicate the strategy or answer detailed questions. And all this has occurred because... He paused meaningfully. Why exactly, Thomas? I'd like a direct answer. Thomas cleared his throat. Richard, we were implementing the restructuring plan Marcus approved. Streamlining the marketing department meant eliminating redundant positions. Was Juliana's position redundant? Richard interrupted. Or was she the lead strategist on our largest account? The question hung in the air for several uncomfortable seconds before Marcus attempted to intervene. Richard, if I may explain the broader context of our efficiency initiative. I'm not interested in broader context right now, Richard cut in. I'm interested in specific decisions regarding a specific employee working on our most valuable client relationship. His voice hardened further. Janet, walk me through the termination process for Juliana. Was proper protocol followed? Janet's response was measured but revealing. The termination request came through yesterday afternoon as an immediate position elimination. HR, best practices recommend 2 weeks' notice for position eliminations not related to performance issues with transition planning for client accounts and projects. In this case, we were instructed that immediate termination was necessary and transition planning had already been handled. By whom? Richard asked pointedly. The request came from Thomas, approved by Marcus. Janet replied. Richard's deep sigh was audible through the phone. So to summarize, our lead strategist on our largest account was abruptly terminated without proper notice or transition. Her work was misattributed to a new employee, and all this was done immediately before a critical client. Presentation. The statement wasn't a question but an indictment. The call fell silent again until Richard continued. Janet, what options do we have to address this situation before tomorrow's presentation? Janet hesitated before responding. From an HR perspective, the most straightforward solution would be to offer immediate reinstatement to Juliana with appropriate acknowledgement that the termination was procedurally flawed. Thomas immediately objected. That undermines the entire restructuring initiative. We can't simply reverse a termination because we discovered intellectual dishonesty, In the process, Richard completed the sentence. I think that's exactly what we can and should do. Marcus tried again to salvage the situation. Richard, perhaps we could consider a consulting arrangement for this specific presentation, allowing Juliana to... No, Richard said firmly. A consulting arrangement doesn't address the fundamental issue. Janet's recommendation is correct, but it doesn't go far enough. He paused briefly. Juliana, are you still on the line? Yes, Mr. Palmer. I confirmed, maintaining a professional tone, despite the vindication I felt hearing the conversation unfold. I want to offer you more than reinstatement, he stated directly. Given the circumstances and your evident value to our client relationships, I'm prepared to offer you a promotion to Director of Strategic Marketing, reporting directly to me, rather than through Thomas or Marcus. The announcement stunned everyone on the call, including me. Thomas began to protest but was silenced by Richard's sharp, "That's enough, Thomas." Marcus adopted a more conciliatory tone. Richard I, whatever decision you feel is appropriate, but perhaps we should discuss the organizational implications offline before. The organizational implications became my direct concern when our largest client relationship was put at risk, Richard replied. Juliana, the offer includes a 30% salary increase, expanded responsibilities, and my personal guarantee that you'll have the authority and resources needed to properly manage our key client relationships. Are you interested in discussing these terms? The sudden power shift left me momentarily speechless. Hours earlier, I had been escorted from the building carrying a box of personal items. Now the CEO was offering me a director-level position with a substantial raise. Despite the temptation to accept immediately, professional instinct told me to proceed thoughtfully. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Palmer, I replied carefully. Given today's events, I would need to consider the terms and discuss specific conditions before making a decision. Of course, Richard acknowledged, seemingly impressed by my measured response. What conditions would you want to discuss? I had prepared for this possibility, though not expecting it would come from the CEO himself. First, I would need assurances regarding team protection, ensuring the current marketing team members who are not involved in this situation aren't negatively impacted by organizational changes. Second, I would want to see formal ethics policies implemented regarding proper attribution and transparent communication. And third, I would need clarity on reporting structures and authority boundaries moving forward. Richard's response was immediate and positive. Those are reasonable requests that align with the kind of leadership we need. I propose we meet tomorrow morning at 7:30 before the Henderson presentation to review a formal offer and address your conditions. Janet will prepare the necessary documentation, and I'll personally oversee the process. That would be acceptable, I agreed, maintaining my professional composure despite the emotional whirlwind. Excellent, Richard concluded. Janet will follow up with meeting details. In the meantime, we need to address tomorrow's presentation. Juliana, would you be willing to lead the presentation to Henderson as originally planned before recent events? Yes, I replied. I'm fully prepared to present the strategy I developed. Good, Richard said with finality. Thomas and Marcus, I expect you both in my office in 15 minutes. Melissa, Janet will speak with you separately about your continued role. Robert, please stay on the line to discuss legal implications. Juliana, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention professionally and directly. We'll speak more tomorrow. The call ended, and within minutes, my email chimed with a calendar invitation for 7:30 a.m. and a brief message from Janet, confirming the meeting details and requesting my preferred salary and title documentation to prepare the offer letter. The email closed with, "On behalf of Vertex Solutions, I apologize for today's circumstances. We look forward to a productive discussion tomorrow." As the evening progressed, I received a series of text messages from Lisa, providing updates on the office fallout. Thomas and Marcus engaged in a heated argument in the parking lot. Melissa leaving the building in tears, but appearing relieved rather than distressed. Richard personally visiting the marketing department to assure the team that positive changes were coming. The company I had left that morning was undergoing a seismic shift by nightfall. My emotions fluctuated between vindication anxiety and strategic calculation. The power dynamic had reversed completely, but I needed to approach the new opportunity with the same professionalism and strategic thinking that had characterized my career. This wasn't simply about regaining a job, it was about leveraging an unexpected situation into a genuine career advancement while ensuring the organizational culture improved for everyone. I spent the evening reviewing the Henderson presentation materials, preparing responses to potential questions, and outlining my conditions for accepting the new position. What had begun as one of the worst days of my professional life was ending with unprecedented opportunity, all because I had maintained my composure, documented everything meticulously, and responded strategically rather than emotionally. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, one where I would enter Vertex, not as the quiet marketing specialist who had been unceremoniously dismissed, but as a director-level executive with the CEO's explicit backing and a mandate to implement ethical leadership. The transformation wasn't yet complete, but the path forward was clearer than it had been at any point during my 5 years with the company. I arrived at Vertex Solutions at 7:15 the next morning, having deliberately chosen a confident professional outfit, a tailored navy suit, I reserved for client presentations. The security guard did a double take when I presented my visitor badge, clearly confused, since he had witnessed my departure carrying a cardboard box just yesterday. Miss Reynolds Janet Miller greeted me in the lobby, her demeanor markedly different from our tense phone conversation. "Thank you for coming. Richard is waiting in the executive conference room." She hesitated, then added more personally, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how yesterday was handled. It wasn't consistent with our established HR protocols." The executive conference room occupied the corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Richard Palmer stood as I entered, extending his hand. "Juliana, thank you for your professionalism throughout this situation. I've spent considerable time reviewing what happened, and I want to be clear that what you experienced does not represent the company values I've worked to establish over 20 years." The meeting proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Janet presented a comprehensive employment contract offering the position of Executive Director of Strategic Marketing with a 40% salary increase, 10% more than Richard had mentioned on the call, expanded benefits, and reporting structure directly to the CEO. "I've taken your conditions seriously," Richard explained. "This morning I'll be announcing a company-wide ethics policy review with a focus on proper attribution and transparent communication. I've also restructured the marketing department to ensure your team members are protected and properly positioned for growth." He slid a folder across the table. "You'll see the organizational chart reflects your authority over strategic client relationships. Thomas has been removed from the marketing department, entirely reassigned to a special projects role with significantly reduced responsibilities while we evaluate his continued employment. Marcus will focus on operations rather than marketing and will have no direct oversight of your team." I reviewed the documents, carefully impressed by the thoroughness and the speed with which they had been prepared. The contract included specific language addressing intellectual property attribution, transparent communication requirements, and clear authority boundaries, all conditions I had requested. "This addresses my concerns comprehensively," I acknowledged. "I appreciate the thoughtfulness behind these changes." "Before you sign," Richard said, leaning forward, "there's something else you should know. After our call yesterday, I personally reviewed other recent departmental changes. I discovered several concerning patterns that extend beyond the marketing department. This situation with your position wasn't isolated. It appears to have been part of a broader effort by Marcus and Thomas to replace existing staff with former colleagues from their previous company." He shook his head, genuine regret evident in his expression. "I failed in my oversight responsibilities by delegating too much authority without sufficient checks and balances. Your situation has prompted a company-wide review of all recent personnel changes and decision-making processes." His candor was unexpected and appreciated. After reviewing the final details and negotiating minor adjustments to the team structure, I signed the contract. Janet provided my new access badge email confirmation of restored and expanded system permissions and details for an announcement that would be made following the Henderson presentation. As we prepared to leave for the client meeting, Melissa Parker appeared at the door, visibly nervous. "Mr. Palmer asked me to join you," she explained hesitantly. "May I speak with you privately for a moment, Juliana?" Richard nodded encouragingly, and we stepped into an adjacent meeting room. "I want to apologize," Melissa began immediately, her voice wavering. "I never should have agreed to modify those documents. Thomas told me it was standard procedure when transitions happen, and I didn't question it because I was new and afraid of losing this opportunity." She looked directly at me, her expression sincere. "What happened to you was wrong, and I should have had the courage to say something sooner." Her apology seemed genuine, though it didn't erase the harm caused. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I replied, "and for speaking truthfully during yesterday's call. That took courage." "Thomas hired me because I worked for him at his previous company." She continued, providing context I had suspected, but not confirmed. "He told me this position was created specifically for me, but I never understood it would come at someone else's expense. He pressured me constantly, saying my future at Vertex depended on successfully taking over the Henderson account." Her explanation highlighted how Thomas had manipulated multiple people in his scheme. "Moving forward, what would you like your role to be?" I asked, recognizing an opportunity to establish a new dynamic. "I actually do have experience in social media analytics," she offered tentatively. "That's what I did before Thomas brought me here. If there's a legitimate role where I could contribute without taking someone else's position, I'd like to prove myself properly." Her request was reasonable and showed self-awareness. "We'll discuss potential roles after today's presentation," I assured her. "For now, I'd like you to attend the Henderson meeting as originally planned, but with appropriate attribution of the work. It will be a learning opportunity and a chance to reset expectations transparently." She nodded gratefully, and we rejoined Richard and Janet to depart for the Henderson offices. The presentation to Henderson Technologies proceeded smoothly, though not without its dramatic elements. Victoria Henderson, a sharp-minded CEO in her early 50s, raised an eyebrow when Richard introduced me as the Executive Director of Strategic Marketing rather than the marketing specialist she had worked with previously. "A well-deserved promotion," Richard explained smoothly. "Juliana has been the strategic mind behind your campaign from the beginning, and we've recognized the value of her leadership." During my presentation, I deliberately acknowledged team contributions, including Melissa's assistance with recent social media analytics. The transparency was not lost on Victoria, who had built her company's reputation on ethical business practices and straightforward communication. When Victoria asked pointed questions about the methodology behind our engagement projections, I was able to provide detailed explanations that clearly demonstrated intimate knowledge of the strategic approach. Explanations Melissa would have struggled to provide convincingly. Following the presentation, Victoria pulled me aside. "Congratulations on the promotion, Juliana." Richard finally recognized what I've seen in our interactions all along. Her knowing smile suggested she understood more about the situation than had been explicitly stated. "I value working with people who demonstrate both competence and integrity. I look forward to expanding our relationship under your leadership." Her words carried significant weight considering Henderson Technologies represented 20% of Vertex's annual revenue. By the time we returned to the office, the client had not only approved the proposed campaign strategy, but had also expressed interest in expanding services into additional business units, a potential 30% increase in contract value. Back at Vertex, Richard called an all-hands meeting to announce the organizational changes. The company gathered in the main conference area as he outlined the new structure, emphasized renewed commitment to ethical business practices, and formally introduced me in my new executive role. Thomas was noticeably absent, while Marcus stood at the back of the room, his expression carefully neutral. Yesterday reminded us that our success depends not just on what we achieve, but how we achieve it, Richard stated. Vertex was founded on principles of integrity, transparency, and valuing the contributions of every team member. We are recommitting to those principles today. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from the marketing team members who had witnessed my abrupt departure just a day earlier. Lisa approached immediately after the meeting, embracing me with genuine emotion. "I knew something was wrong with how they handled your termination," she said. "When you walked out yesterday, half the team was ready to follow you. This is how justice is supposed to work." The transition into my new role progressed rapidly over the subsequent weeks. Thomas submitted his resignation the following day, presumably recognizing his position had become untenable. Marcus remained with the company but with restructured responsibilities that limited his authority over personnel decisions. I worked with Janet to implement comprehensive ethics policies with specific provisions regarding attribution, transparent communication, and proper procedures for organizational changes. We also established an anonymous reporting system for employees to safely raise concerns about potential violations with oversight from an ethics committee rather than individuals who might have conflicts of interest. For the marketing team, I instituted regular strategy sessions where every member could contribute ideas and receive appropriate credit for their contributions. I created clear documentation standards that included attribution sections in all materials, ensuring everyone's work was properly recognized. Melissa found a legitimate role as a social media analytics specialist where her actual skills could be utilized without displacing other team members. The most significant personal change came in my leadership approach. Having experienced firsthand the damage caused by opaque decision-making and power politics, I committed to transparent collaborative leadership that valued individual contributions while advancing collective goals. The quiet marketing specialist who had been content to let her work speak for itself evolved into a confident executive who ensured all voices were heard and acknowledged. 6 months after that tumultuous day, Vertex's marketing department had transformed into the company's highest-performing division. Employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically, turnover decreased, and client relationships strengthened through consistent ethical engagement.